The war room of the Veltari High Council smelled like old metal and fear. Not that anyone would admit it. 12 species sat around the curved table, their representatives dressed in colors that meant power on their home worlds. They had gathered because of a problem. The problem had a name. Humans. Fleet Scout Commander Rethvan stood at the center of the room with his hands clasped behind his back. He was tall, even for a Veltari. His gray skin was covered in the ritual scars of 60 military campaigns. He had seen worlds burn. He had watched civilizations kneel. There was very little left in the galaxy that could make his heart beat faster. "The species is young," said High Counselor Mathan, sliding a data tablet across the table. "They discovered faster than light travel roughly 300 standard years ago. Our models classify them as a Class 3 nascent civilization. Warm-blooded, carbon-based, short-lived, fragile." Rethvan picked up the tablet and looked at the information. There was not much. A few blurry images of human ships taken from long range. A rough map of their territory along the Orion Arm. Population estimates that put them somewhere around a few billion, maybe more. The kind of numbers that made older species yawn. "How many warships?" Rethvan asked. "Our best estimate is between 200 and 500, said Mathan, consistent with their development stage. Rethvan almost smiled. His recon flotilla alone had 40 ships. He had scouted species with larger navies than this before breakfast. This was not a mission. This was an errand. "I will take my flotilla to their border," Rethvan said. "We will observe, catalog their military strength, and report back within one cycle. If they are what you say they are, the Dominion will have a new servant species before the year ends." Counselor Dreth, a broad-shouldered Velthari with ambition written across every scar on his face, leaned forward. "Do not underestimate them, Commander. Even small animals can bite." Rethvan looked at Dreth the way a mountain looks at a stone. "I have never been bitten, Counselor." He left the room without waiting for permission. That was one of the advantages of being the most decorated scout commander in Dominion history. Nobody told him when to leave. His flotilla launched 3 days later from the military station above the Velthari homeworld. 40 ships, each one carrying the best stealth technology the Dominion had ever produced. They could slip through enemy sensor nets like ghosts through walls. They had done it dozens of times before. They would do it again. Rethvan stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Silent Blade, and watched the stars stretch into lines as they entered faster-than-light travel. Beside him stood his second-in-command, Sub-Commander Eel. She was Drenaki, which meant she was insectoid, with 4 arms and compound eyes that saw in spectrums most species could not imagine. She was also the smartest person Rethvan had ever met, and he did not say that about many people. "I have been monitoring their communications," Aiel said. Her voice was soft, like dry leaves moving over stone. "The humans use radio signals, primitive but effective." "What about them?" "There are too many." Aiel tilted her head, the way she always did when something did not make sense to her. "The signals are everywhere, Commander. They bleed across every frequency, and they are in hundreds of different languages." Rethvan frowned. "Hundreds? One species with hundreds of languages?" "At least, perhaps thousands. It is difficult to tell because they speak so much. The volume of communication is extraordinary. It is as if every single one of them is talking all the time." Rethvan shook his head. "Poor signal discipline. It is what you would expect from a young species. They have not yet learned to be quiet." Aiel said nothing, but her compound eyes flickered in a way that Rethvan had learned to read over 20 years of service together. It meant she was not convinced. They traveled for 6 days before they reached the edge of human-claimed space. The Velthari called it the Orion boundary. The humans, they would later learn, called it the Sol Exclusion Zone. It was the point where human territory officially began, at least according to human maps. The flotilla dropped out of faster-than-light travel, and immediately activated all stealth systems. 40 ships vanished from every known form of detection. They were invisible. They were silent. They were the best the Dominion had. And then they saw the buoys. At first, Rethvan thought they were mines, small objects, each one about the size of a personal shuttle, floating in the darkness of space. They pulsed with a faint blue light. Each one broadcast a simple message in an astonishing number of languages. The message said the same thing in all of them. You are entering human space. Please identify yourself. Failure to identify may result in investigation. Welcome. Welcome. Rethvan almost laughed at that. But then Aiel ran the numbers, and nobody laughed. The buoys were not scattered randomly. They formed a shell, a perimeter that wrapped around human space like a skin. And the shell was not thin. It was dozens of light years deep in some places. The number of buoys was not in the thousands. It was not in the hundreds of thousands. There were millions of them. Millions of small machines, floating in the emptiness between stars, each one broadcasting its polite little message into the void. The resources required to build them, to deploy them, to maintain them across such an enormous volume of space, was beyond anything the Dominion had ever dedicated to a single project. The Velthari had built great things. They had constructed orbital stations, and generation ships, and weapons that could crack planets. But they had never built millions of anything, and scattered them across light years of empty space, just to say hello. Aiel stood beside Rethvan and stared at the display. The buoys stretched in every direction, a vast field of tiny blue lights blinking patiently in the dark. Commander, she said quietly. Her voice had changed. It was smaller now, more careful. What kind of species wastes resources on millions of warning beacons for empty space? He stood on his bridge, surrounded by the best stealth technology in the known galaxy. And for the first time in 60 campaigns, he felt something cold move through his chest. He told himself it was nothing. He was wrong. Rethvan chose the target carefully. He did not want to go deep into human space. Not yet. He wanted something small, something on the edge, a backwater colony where they could observe without risk and get a clear picture of what humanity actually looked like, up close. The system was called Haldane's Rest. It appeared on no Dominion star chart. They found it only by following human communication signals to their source. Based on the low volume of traffic, Rethvan expected a minor outpost, maybe a single colony on one world, maybe a few orbital stations. The kind of place a young species would plant a flag and call progress. The flotilla dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. Still cloaked, still invisible, Rethvan stood on the bridge and waited for the sensors to paint the picture. The picture did not make sense. "Commander," said the sensor officer, a young Velthari named Kost, who had never once raised his voice in 2 years of service. His voice cracked now. "I am reading 14 inhabited bodies." 14 stations? Rethvan asked. "No, Commander. 14 worlds and moons, all of them colonized. 3 of them have full orbital rings." Rethvan said nothing. He walked to the sensor display and looked at it himself. Kost was right. The system was full, not just occupied, but full in a way that Rethvan had only seen in the oldest and most developed systems of the Dominion. 14 worlds, each one covered in the lights of cities. Orbital rings, massive structures that wrapped around entire planets, gleaming with docks and habitats and industrial platforms. And everywhere, there were ships. "How many vessels in system?" Rethvan asked. Kost worked his console. His fingers were shaking. "Thousands, Commander. I am counting over 9,000 distinct contacts." Most appear to be civilian. Cargo haulers, passenger liners, mining vessels, construction ships. He paused. Some of the cargo haulers are larger than our cruisers. Aiel leaned in beside Rethvon and studied the display with her compound eyes. She pointed one of her 4 arms at a cluster of contacts near the 3rd orbital ring. "Those are not cargo ships," she said. Rethvon looked. 80 ships, moving in formation. They were organized, disciplined, and armed. The largest one was enormous. It made the Silent Blade look like a shuttle parked next to a mountain. Its hull bristled with weapon systems that Rethvon could not identify. He felt his mouth go dry. "A battle fleet," he said. "We have found their military." "I do not think so," Eel said. She had already tapped into the local communication channels. Human signals were unencrypted. They simply broadcast everything openly, as if the idea of someone listening had never worried them. Their communications identify this group as the Haldane's Rest Customs and Border Enforcement Detachment. Rethvon stared at her. "Customs? Yes. Those are police ships. Yes. The one that is 12 times the size of my flagship is a police ship. Yes, Commander." Rethvon stood very still for a long moment. Around him, the bridge crew had stopped pretending to work. They were all listening. They were all afraid, though none of them would say it. "What is the population of this system?" Rethvon asked. "Based on energy consumption, communication density, and infrared signatures, I estimate approximately 11 billion individuals." 11 billion. In one system, a backwater system that did not even appear on their charts. The entire Velthari homeworld, the heart of the oldest species in the Dominion, held 8 billion. Rethvon felt something shift inside him. It was not fear exactly. It was the feeling of discovering that the ground you had been standing on your entire life was not as solid as you thought. "We are leaving this system," he said, "now." The flotilla pulled back to deep space, far from any star, where they could float in darkness and think. Rethvon gathered his senior officers in the briefing room and told them what they had seen. He watched their faces change as the information settled into their minds like poison into water. Then Aiel made it worse. "I have been accessing the human information networks," she said. She stood at the front of the room, with a holographic display behind her. "The humans publish almost everything. Their networks are open. They have something called the Public Fleet Registry. It is exactly what it sounds like, a public list of every military vessel in their central navy." "They publish their fleet numbers?" said Captain Vaughn, one of the flotilla's senior ship commanders. He was a veteran of 30 campaigns, and he looked like he wanted to be sick. "In the open? For anyone to read?" "Yes," said Aiel. "They appear to consider it a matter of public accountability. Their civilian government requires it." Rethvon closed his eyes. "How many ships, Aiel?" Aiel tried to say the number. Her translator, a sophisticated device implanted in her throat that could convert her native Dranaki clicks into any known language, failed. It made a stuttering sound and went silent. She tried again. On the 3rd attempt, she gave up on language entirely and simply displayed the number on the holographic screen behind her. 4,200,000. 4,200,000 active military vessels. That was the Central Human Navy alone. Not their colony defense fleets, not their regional forces, not their reserves. Just the main navy. The room was silent. Not the comfortable silence of professionals thinking. The heavy silence of people who had just realized that everything they knew about the galaxy was wrong. Captain Vaughn spoke first. His voice was barely a whisper. "That cannot be correct." "I have verified it 6 times, Aiel said. "The data is consistent across multiple human sources. They do not appear to be exaggerating. If anything, I believe some vessels may be excluded from this registry for security reasons." "What about total military strength?" Rethvon asked. He asked anyway, because that was his job. El changed the display. The number that appeared was larger. 9 million. 9 million military vessels across all human branches, jurisdictions, and colonial defense forces. The Velthari Dominion, all 12 species combined, the greatest power the galaxy had ever known, maintained a combined military fleet of roughly 300,000 ships. They had believed this made them invincible. Rethvan looked at the number on the screen. He looked at his officers. He saw the same thing in every face, the slow, terrible understanding that the Dominion was not the biggest thing in the galaxy, that they had never been the biggest thing in the galaxy, that somewhere along the Orion Arm, a species they had dismissed as young and fragile had quietly built something so vast that the Dominion was nothing more than a rounding error. "Commander," El said. She was watching him with all of her compound eyes. "What do we do?" Rethvan straightened his back. He was a soldier. He had been a soldier his entire life. Soldiers did not panic. Soldiers gathered information. "We stay," he said. "We learn everything we can, and then we go home and tell the council the truth." He did not say what he was thinking. He was thinking that the truth might be the most dangerous thing he had ever carried. They stayed for 72 hours. 3 days floating in the dark between stars, while the Silent Blade's computers drank from the ocean of information that humans simply gave away for free. Rethvan slept for 4 of those hours. He spent the rest on the bridge, watching the data come in, feeling the shape of his understanding change with every new piece of information. It was like watching a flood. At first, the water seemed manageable. Then it rose past your ankles, then your knees, then your chest, and then you understood that you had been standing in the path of something that had no interest in whether you survived. The first thing they learned was about population. Aiel presented the findings in the briefing room on the second day. She had stopped trying to soften the numbers. There was no point. The total human population across all systems, stations, habitats, and deep space installations is approximately 2.8 trillion, she said. Nobody spoke. The number sat in the room like a living thing. The entire Velthari Dominion, 12 species spread across hundreds of worlds, the product of thousands of years of civilization, held 300 billion individuals. Humans outnumbered them nearly 10 to 1, and humans had been in space for only 3 centuries. "How?" asked Captain Vaughn. He had asked this question many times over the past 2 days. It had become a kind of prayer. "How is this possible?" Rethvan had asked the same question. He had ordered his science team to find the answer. The answer, when it came, was simple and terrible. Humans bred fast, faster than any species in the Dominion. A human female could produce a new individual roughly once per year. In practice, they did not do this, but the biological capacity was there. More importantly, humans matured quickly. A Velthari child took 40 years to reach adulthood. A human child took roughly 18. In the time it took to raise 1 generation of Velthari, humans could raise 2 or even 3. But that was only part of it. The real difference was not biological. It was psychological. Every species in the Dominion had, at some point in its history, reached what the sociologists called equilibrium, a point where the populations stabilize, where the species looked at the space it occupied and decided it was enough. The Velthari had reached equilibrium 6,000 years ago. The Dranaki had reached it 4,000 years ago. Every species eventually stopped growing and settled into a comfortable balance with its environment. Humans had not done this. Humans did not appear to have a concept of enough. When they filled a world, they built stations. When they filled the stations, they colonized another world. When they ran out of habitable worlds, they built habitats in empty space. They expanded the way water flows downhill. Not because they decided to, because it was their nature. "They do not see empty space the way we do," said Dr. Velish, the flotilla's chief xenobiologist. She was an older Velthari woman, who had studied alien species for 100 years. Her hands were shaking, and Rethvon did not think it was from age. We see empty space as a boundary, a natural limit. They see it as an invitation, or perhaps an insult. They fill it because it is there. Rethvon thought about the millions of warning buoys strung across light years of nothing. He was beginning to understand. On the third day, they found something that made the population numbers seem almost reasonable by comparison. EL had been monitoring human military communications. These were slightly more secure than civilian channels, but not by much. Humans used encryption, but they also published enormous amounts of military information publicly, apparently because their civilian government demanded it. They called it transparency. Rethvon called it madness, but it was useful madness. I have found records of a recent military exercise, IL said. The humans call it Iron Meridian. She put the data on the main display. Iron Meridian was a fleet exercise conducted in deep space, far from any system. Its purpose was to practice large-scale fleet coordination and battle maneuvers. The exercise involved 40,000 ships. Rethvon stared at the number. 40,000 ships for a training exercise. The Dominion's largest military operation in its entire history, the siege of the Krethal Nebula, had involved 6,000 ships. It had taken 3 years to plan. It had nearly bankrupted 3 member species. The logistics alone had required a dedicated fleet of support vessels. The humans had thrown 40,000 ships at a practice drill and apparently thought nothing of it. The after-action reports treated it as routine. There were complaints about food quality in the mess halls. There were recommendations for improving shuttle scheduling. It read like the minutes of a boring meeting, not the summary of an operation that dwarfed anything the Dominion had ever attempted. "Commander," said a young analyst named Roth. He was standing at his station near the back of the briefing room. He was very young, barely past his military training, and his face was the color of ash. "I have found something else." Rethvon looked at him. "What?" "The humans maintain something called the Ghost Reserve. It is a strategic reserve fleet. Ships that are not currently active, but are maintained in automated orbital yards, kept in ready condition for rapid reactivation." "How many ships in the Ghost Reserve?" Roth swallowed. 2.1 million, Commander." The room made a sound. Not a gasp, not a word, just a collective exhale, as if the air had been punched out of every chest at the same time. 2 million ships sitting in storage, waiting, maintained by machines, ready to wake up and join the fight if the humans ever needed them. Rethvon walked to the main display and looked at the holographic map of human space. It was enormous. It covered a significant portion of the Orion Arm, and it was still growing. Every year, new colonies appeared at the edges. New stations, new habitats. The map was alive. It breathed and expanded like a living organism. He thought about what it would mean to fight this species. The Dominion had 300,000 military vessels. The humans had 9 million active and 2 million in reserve. Even if every ship in the Dominion attacked at the same time, they would face odds of more than 30 to 1. And those were just the current numbers. If war began, the humans would build more. Based on their industrial capacity, they could produce warships at a rate that would double their fleet within 2 years. The Dominion could not replace its losses that fast. No one could. Rethvon had spent his life as a predator. He had chased smaller species across the galaxy and brought them to heel. He had never questioned his place at the top of the food chain. Standing on his bridge, staring at the map of human space, he understood for the first time what it felt like to be prey. It was not a dramatic feeling. It was quiet and cold and absolute. Like realizing that the shadow above you was not a cloud, but a predator's wing. Aiel came to stand beside him. She had been his partner for 20 years. She knew him well enough to read his silences. "What do we report to the High Council?" she asked. Rethvon did not look away from the map. "Tell them the truth," he said. His voice was steady. His hands were not. "Tell them everything we have found. every number, every fact. And then, he was quiet for a long time. The map glowed in front of him, vast and bright and growing. Then tell them to pray that the humans are as peaceful as they claim to be. Because if they are not, there is nothing in this galaxy that can stop them. Aiel nodded. She did not argue. There was nothing to argue about. The numbers spoke for themselves, and what they said was final. On the morning of the fourth day, Rethvon gave the order to withdraw. They had seen enough. More than enough. The flotilla began its turn toward Dominion space, 40 ships moving in perfect silence through the darkness between the stars. They made it 17 minutes before everything changed. The communications officer, a quiet Velthari named Sen, who had spent 12 years listening to alien signals without once hearing anything that surprised her, suddenly sat upright in her chair. Her hands froze over her console. Her face went blank. "Commander," she said, "I am receiving a transmission." "Source?" Rethvon asked. "Tight beam. Highly focused." She paused. Her voice dropped. "It is aimed directly at us." The bridge went cold. Not the temperature, the feeling. Every officer stopped what they were doing and turned to look at Sen. A tight beam transmission, aimed directly at them, meant someone knew exactly where they were. It meant the stealth systems, the best in the Dominion, the technology that had allowed them to spy on dozens of species without ever being detected, were useless. "Put it through," Rethvon said. A voice filled the bridge. It was calm. It was clear. And it was speaking perfect Veltari with the accent of an educated person from the central provinces of the homeworld. "Scout Flotilla, you are seen. You have been seen since you crossed the buoy line. Please hold position. A representative will arrive shortly to make formal contact. We mean you no harm." The message ended. The bridge was silent. Aiel was the first to speak. "They have been watching us," she said. Her compound eyes were moving in a pattern Rethvon had never seen before. It took him a moment to realize it was fear. In 20 years, he had never seen Aiel afraid. "Since the beginning, since we crossed the buoy perimeter." "The buoys," Rethvon said. The millions of buoys they had seen at the border were not just warning beacons. They were not just polite messages saying welcome. They were sensor platforms, a detection network so vast and so dense that nothing could pass through it unseen. The Dominion's finest stealth technology had walked straight into a net that covered light years of space, and it had not even been a contest. "They let us in," said Captain Vaughn from his ship, connected by secure channel. His voice was hollow. "They saw us enter, and they let us proceed." "Yes," said Rethvon. He was surprised by how calm his own voice sounded. Inside, he felt like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down. They held position. They waited. Rethvon used the time to think. He thought about what it meant that the humans had watched them for 4 days and done nothing. They could have destroyed the flotilla at any time. 40 ships, even the best in the Dominion, would not survive against the kind of firepower he had seen in a single backwater system. The humans had chosen not to. They had chosen to watch, to let the scouts see what they wanted to see. And now they were sending a representative. The ship arrived 20 minutes later. It dropped out of faster-than-light travel, with a precision that Rethvon's navigation officer later called impossible, appearing less than 1,000 units from the Silent Blade's hull. It was small, not a warship. The sensors identified it as a diplomatic courier, lightly armed, carrying a crew of fewer than 50. One ship, alone, approaching a flotilla of 40 Dominion warships. Either the humans were insane, or they were so confident in their position that 40 warships did not concern them. Rethvon knew which one it was. A communication came through. The same calm voice, the same perfect Velthari. "This is Commander Ava Osei of the United Human Stellar Compact Diplomatic Service. I request permission to board your flagship for a face-to-face meeting. I will come alone and unarmed. Rethvan granted permission because there was nothing else to do. He assembled an honor guard in the docking bay, not because he expected trouble, but because he was a military officer, and military officers maintain standards even when the galaxy was falling apart around them. The airlock opened, and Commander Ava Osei walked onto his ship. She was smaller than he expected. Humans were not large creatures. She came up to Rethvan's chest, and she was lean and compact, in a way that made her look like she might blow away in a strong wind. Her skin was dark brown. Her hair was cut very short. She wore a simple uniform, dark blue with silver markings, and she carried nothing. No weapon, no datapad, no visible communication device. She walked into a ship full of armed aliens, as if she were walking into a friend's home. She was smiling. "Commander Rethvan," she said, in Velthari so natural it made his skin prickle. "Thank you for receiving me. I hope your time in our space has been comfortable." Rethvan studied her. He had faced down warlords and tyrants and creatures that could kill with a thought. This small human woman, standing alone and unarmed on his ship, surrounded by soldiers who could break her in half, was the most unsettling thing he had ever encountered. Because she was not afraid, not even slightly. And it was not the false bravery of someone pretending. It was the genuine absolute calm of someone who knew, with complete certainty, that she was safe. "You knew we were here," Rethvan said. It was not a question. "From the moment you crossed the buoy perimeter," Osei said, "our sensor network tracked your flotilla continuously. You have excellent stealth technology, by the way. Among the best we have ever seen. It took our systems almost 4 full seconds to lock onto your ships after you entered detection range. 4 seconds. The technology that had taken the Dominion 50 years to develop had given them 4 seconds of invisibility." "Why did you not stop us?" Rethvan asked. "Or destroy us?" Osei tilted her head. The smile faded, replaced by an expression of genuine confusion. "Why would we destroy you? You were not hostile. You were looking. There is no crime in looking. We were spying on your military capabilities. Yes, and we wanted you to see them." The smile returned, but it was different now. Warmer, almost kind. "Commander, we knew the Dominion would send scouts eventually. We have been aware of your interest in our territory for some time. We decided it would be more effective to let you observe freely than to try to explain ourselves through diplomatic channels. Sometimes seeing is more convincing than talking." Rethvan felt the pieces fall into place. The open information networks, the unencrypted communications, the publicly available fleet registries. None of it was poor discipline or naive transparency. It was deliberate. The humans had left the door open because they wanted someone to walk through it and see what was inside. Osei reached into a pocket and produced a small data crystal. She held it out to Rethvan. "A gift," she said. "A formal diplomatic introduction from the United Human Stellar Compact. Trade proposals, cultural exchange programs. An open invitation to send ambassadors to any of our systems." Rethvan took the crystal. It was warm from her body heat. Such a small thing. "There is also a strategic assessment." Her voice did not change, but her eyes sharpened. "Prepared by our intelligence services. A comprehensive analysis of the Veltari Dominion's military capabilities, economic structure, and internal political dynamics. We included it as a gesture of good faith. We believe partnerships work best when both sides understand each other clearly." A strategic assessment of the Dominion, prepared by humans. Rethvan felt a chill run through him that had nothing to do with the temperature of his ship. The humans had not just been watching his flotilla. They had been studying the entire Dominion. For how long, he did not know. Long enough, apparently, to understand them completely. "We have no hostile intentions toward the Dominion," Osei said. We are interested in trade, in partnership, in the exchange of knowledge and culture. We believe the galaxy is large enough for everyone. The message behind the message was clear. It did not need to be spoken. Rethvan heard it anyway, as loudly as if she had shouted it. We know everything about you. We could end you. We would rather be friends. Osei turned to leave. She paused at the airlock and looked back over her shoulder. One more thing, Commander. The fleet exercise you observed. Iron Meridian. Yes. That was a training operation for our military academy. The cadets, essentially. The active Navy was conducting operations elsewhere at the time. She paused. I mention this only for the sake of accuracy in your report. She smiled one last time, a warm and genuine smile that somehow made everything worse, and walked through the airlock. Her ship departed 3 minutes later. It jumped to faster-than-light travel with the same impossible precision it had arrived with. And then it was gone. Rethvan stood in the docking bay, holding the data crystal, surrounded by his honor guard. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The silence stretched until it filled every corner of the ship. Commander, Aiel said finally. She had been standing at the back of the bay, watching everything. The cadets? The cadets, Rethvan confirmed. His voice was very quiet. 40,000 ships was a school exercise. He closed his hand around the data crystal and walked to the bridge. He gave the order to return to Dominican space at maximum speed. The flotilla turned and ran, and for the first time in his career, Rethvan did not feel like he was retreating from a mission. He felt like he was running. The High Council chamber was built to inspire fear. It was carved from the black stone of the Veltari homeworld, a vast circular room with seats rising in tiers like the inside of a bowl. Every surface was polished until it reflected light like dark water. The ceiling was open to the sky, and the pale sun of the homeworld poured down like a spotlight on whoever stood at the center. It was designed so that the person speaking would feel small, so they would remember their place. Rethvan stood at the center and did not feel small. He felt tired, he felt old, and he felt something he had not felt since he was a child soldier in his first campaign. He felt the weight of knowing something that would change everything. The chamber was full, not just the 12 counselors. Every senior military commander in the Dominion had been called. Admirals, generals, fleet masters, intelligence chiefs. Hundreds of the most powerful beings in the known galaxy, all of them looking down at one scout commander standing alone on the black stone floor. Begin, said High Counselor Mathan. Rethvan began. He told them about the buoys, millions of them stretching across light years of space, forming a sensor network so dense that nothing could pass through it undetected. He told them about Haldane's Rest, a system that did not appear on any Dominion chart, holding 14 colonized worlds and 11 billion people. He told them about the police ships that were larger than Dominion warships. He told them about the numbers, the 4.2 million ships of the Central Human Navy, the 9 million total military vessels, the 2.8 trillion human beings spread across 4,000 systems, the Ghost Reserve with its 2 million mothballed ships waiting to be woken up. He told them about Iron Meridian, 40,000 ships in a training exercise. A school exercise run by cadets. When he finished, the chamber erupted. It was not the controlled debate that the council was known for. It was chaos. Counselors shouted at each other. Military commanders demanded to know how this had happened, how a species they had dismissed as primitive had grown into something that dwarfed them without anyone noticing. Accusations flew like weapons. Someone called Rethvan a liar. Someone else called him a coward. Someone demanded his arrest for spreading defeatist propaganda. Rethvan stood in the center of the storm and waited. It was Counselor Dreth who brought the room to order. He stood and raised his hand, and his voice cut through the noise like a blade. Dreth was the leader of the Warhawks, the faction that had never met a problem they did not want to solve with ships and soldiers. He was large and scarred, and he had the kind of presence that made other people shut up. "Commander Rethvon, I have one question. Are these numbers verified?" "I verified them personally," Rethvon said. "My sub-commander verified them independently. The humans themselves confirmed them through their public records and through direct communication." Direct communication? Rethvon told them about Commander Osei, about the single diplomatic courier that had approached 40 warships without fear, about the woman who had boarded his flagship alone and unarmed and smiled at him as if he were an old friend, about the data crystal. "She gave us a strategic assessment," Rethvon said. He activated the holographic display. The human intelligence report appeared in the air above the chamber floor, translated into Veltari, page after page of detailed analysis. The room went quiet. The assessment was devastating. It contained the current position of every major Dominion fleet. It listed the production capacity of every Dominion shipyard. It described the economic vulnerabilities of 6 of the 12 member species. It outlined the Dranaki separatist movement in detail that made the Dranaki counselor's face drain of color. It included the health records of High Counselor Mathan, including a heart condition that only 3 doctors in the Dominion knew about. The humans had penetrated everything, not with ships or weapons, with information. They had reached into the most secure systems in the Dominion and taken whatever they wanted. And they had done it so quietly that no one had noticed until they chose to show their hand. "This is impossible," whispered the intelligence chief. A thin Velthari woman named Jal, who ran the largest spy network in the Dominion. Her face was the color of old paper. "We detected no intrusions, none." "You would not," Rethvon said. "Their technology is beyond ours, not by a small margin. By a margin we cannot currently measure." Counselor Dreth stared at the holographic display for a long time. Then he turned to Rethvon. His voice was hard, the voice of a man who had built his career on strength, and was not ready to admit that strength had limits. "Every species has a weakness, Commander. What is theirs?" Rethvon looked at Dreth. He thought about Commander Osei and her warm smile. He thought about the public fleet registries and the unencrypted communications and the open invitation to send ambassadors. He thought about a species with 9 million warships that had chosen to send a single unarmed woman to talk. "They are kind," Rethvon said. "That is their weakness. They do not want to fight. They prefer peace. They prefer trade and partnership and cultural exchange. They build parks and schools and hospitals on the same worlds where they build their warships. They see war as a failure, not a tool." The chamber was completely silent. "That is the only reason we are still alive to have this conversation. If they were like us, if they were conquerors, if they saw other species the way we see them, this discussion would not be happening. There would be no Dominion. There would be no Council. There would be nothing but human space, stretching from one end of the galaxy to the other, and we would be a footnote in their history books." Dreth did not sit down, but something in his posture changed. The steel went out of his shoulders. His jaw unclenched. For a brief moment, he looked like what he was beneath the scars and the bluster, an old man who had just realized the world was bigger than he thought. "You recommend against military action," Dreth said. "I recommend against suicide," Rethvon said. "Which is what military action against this species would be. Not defeat, not a difficult war, suicide. Even if every ship in the Dominion attacked at once, they would face 30-to-1 odds, but the numbers were only part of the problem. Humans had a historical tendency that Rethvon had found in their own records, something they called a war economy. When threatened, humans did not just fight with what they had. They transformed their entire civilization into a machine for making war. They had done it before, in conflicts on their homeworld, increasing their industrial production by 400% in a matter of months. A human civilization at war would not have 9 million ships, it would have 90 million. And every one of them would be crewed by a species that had been fighting wars since before they learned to write. The council voted. It was not close. The Warhawks lost by a margin that would have been embarrassing if anyone had the energy to feel embarrassment. The Dominion would send ambassadors, not warships. Within a year, the first Velthari embassy opened on a human world. Within 5 years, trade between the Dominion and the Compact exceeded the total value of trade between all 12 Dominion species combined. Human medical technology doubled the Velthari average lifespan. Human agricultural techniques ended food shortages on 3 Dominion worlds. Human engineers helped redesign the Dranaki colonial fleet, making it 4 times more efficient. The humans gave freely. Not because they had to, because they wanted to. This, Rethvan eventually decided, was the most alien thing about them. They helped because helping was in their nature, the same way expanding was in their nature, the same way building was in their nature. 10 years after the scouting mission, Rethvan stood on a balcony on the human world of New Cascadia. He was no longer a military officer. He was the Dominion's ambassador to the human compact. It was a quieter life, and he had grown to love it. The city below him held 800 million people. It stretched to the horizon in every direction, a vast landscape of towers and parks and rivers and bridges. Trains moved through it like blood through veins. Ships rose from its surface and climbed into the sky every few seconds, heading to other worlds, other stars, other futures. Aiel came to stand beside him. She was his aide now, as she had always been his partner. Her compound eyes reflected the city lights. "Do you ever wonder," she said, "what would have happened if you had recommended a different course of action? If you had told the council to fight?" Rethvan watched the city. Below the balcony, in a park that covered several square blocks, human children were playing. They ran and shouted and laughed. Some of them were playing with Velthari children, the sons and daughters of embassy staff. The alien children were taller and grayer and moved differently, but the human children did not seem to care about that. They played together with the simple, total acceptance that children have before they learn to draw lines between themselves and others. "I am a soldier," Rethvan said. "I have burned worlds. I have destroyed civilizations. I have ended species. There is very little violence that I have not committed or ordered committed in the name of the Dominion." He watched a human child, a small girl with curly hair, take the hand of a Veltari boy and pull him toward a climbing structure. The boy hesitated. The girl laughed and pulled harder. After a moment, the boy laughed too. "But I am not fool enough to fight a species that builds parks for its children on the edge of a war zone," Rethvan said, "and does not even think of it as brave." Aiel nodded. They stood together on the balcony and watched the children play. The city hummed with the sound of 800 million lives being lived. Somewhere above them, ships climbed toward the stars, carrying humans to new worlds, new frontiers, new futures. The galaxy was very large, but the humans, Rethvan had come to understand, were larger, not because of their ships or their weapons or their numbers, because of something else. Something that had no name in any Veltari language. Something that looked like kindness and felt like hope and moved through the universe like water flowing downhill, filling everything, reaching everywhere, unstoppable and warm.